this is an Ask Me Anything town hall that these folks have kindly agreed to consent to. So if you can send questions up over there, that would
send them to the end of the aisles and we'll pick them up.
great. And to start things off tonight, I'd like to introduce Jeff Paulette, the director of the Ford Library and Foundation.
Well, one of those things is correct. I am Jeff Paulette, but I'm not the director of either the library or the foundation. I run the Ford Leadership Forum over at the Gerald R. Ford Foundation. The library is owned by the National Archives, and we're very grateful to the library for allowing us to use this space. They've been a great partner to us over the years. We're also very grateful at the Gerald Ford Foundation to Keep Our Republic and to Pillars of the Community for co-sponsoring this event for us. I just want to say briefly by way of introduction, Tuesday was Constitution Day, and I was thinking back to the Constitutional Convention. Rhode Island didn't send delegates. Of the 55 original delegates, 16 had left by the time the final vote was taken. 3 of the delegates there refused to sign the document. Gouverneur Morris, one of the main architects of the document, said that he disagreed with large portions of it. Ben Franklin thought that he had all kinds of problems with it. Alexander Hamilton said that no one's ideas were further from the final document than his were, and yet they all signed it. And at the end of Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention, he tells the story of Ben Franklin looking at Washington's chair in the convention hall. And on the chair, there was a sun on the horizon carved into the back of the chair. And Franklin stood up and said, as long as I've been at this convention, I've been wondering whether that was a rising sun or a setting sun. And I feared it was a setting sun. But now that we have actually signed this document, I think it may have been a rising sun. And to keep the sun in the sky, it's up to us as citizens and up to our elected officials to maintain this constitutional republic that is a fragile enterprise. And so we're grateful to everyone who has come here tonight. I do want to recognize a couple members of our audience. Jonathan Malik, an incoming city councilman from Ann Arbor, is here tonight. Former Congressman Dave Trott is here tonight, and former Congressman Dick Gephardt is here tonight. And we are grateful to all of them. For younger people in the audience, the name Dick Gephardt might not sound familiar to you, but if you're, if not, he's a great man, and we are thrilled to have him here and supporting this cause. With that, I am going to turn it over to Ari Middleman, who is the director of Keep Our Republic. And thank you all for coming.
Jeff, thank you very much. We are so delighted everyone's here. Coincidentally, as we speak, our nonprofit is having a very similar conversation in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is what we do. We are all over the state of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, helping demystify election administration. I've learned a lot in the last 24 hours from not only officials from those states, but also from Arizona, from North Carolina, and the state of Georgia. To my left is a great official from the state of Georgia who has a flight to catch shortly, so I'm going to hand the mic to him, but we are really grateful, and please get the questions past the side, and we'll have a great discussion over the next hour and 15 minutes.
This on? Okay. I am Gabe Sterling. I'm from the great state of Georgia. I'll say this at the University of Michigan, go Dogs. And congratulations on your national championship. It's really great we get them back to back. So Georgia is, of course, one of the swing states, and the reason I have to leave, my intention was originally to be here for this entire event, and I wanted to remind everybody in this room and anybody who's listening, elections officials are regular human beings with regular lives, and my stepmother is in the hospital and is taking a bad turn, so I have to get home. So that's why I have to leave. Otherwise, I'd be here all night answering all of your questions. And one of the things I think is really important to understand is elections are run by human beings. They're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're also highly trained professionals. And in every state in this nation, they follow some of the basic same processes. They're all a little different, they're all slightly, askew from everybody else. We wouldn't do things a certain way, but nearly everybody has some kind of voter registration system or same-day registration. Everybody, in some way, shape, or form, identifies the voters that come in. 98% of people in America will be casting ballots on paper this year, which is the most we've had. I mean, not even know how far back we can go. They have reconciliation at the end to make sure the number of voters who checked in or signed an absentee envelope is the same number of ballots that were cast. And we all have to understand and give grace. With millions of people doing millions of processes with millions of votes and millions of pieces of paper, human beings make mistakes. Mistakes do not fraud make. Understand that. And one of the reasons I think issues like this, we were with the press all day explaining the intricacies of elections, is the lack of understanding of how these processes work can be exploited. And they have been exploited. For political reasons, for money-raising reasons, for sour grapes reasons. That's the reality of it. And in Georgia, we get it from both sides. I mean, in 2018, we had a candidate who came up short, who claimed the election was stolen and refused to concede. Her name was Stacey Abrams. She was a Democrat. And she made a lot of the exact same claims that Donald Trump. Machines are flipping votes. There's people who were kept away. We didn't have watchers available. It's a program that's designed to undermine people's faith in elections. And the reason we have ballots is so we can avoid bullets. That is the reality of this. And I am so appreciative of the men and women across this nation who volunteer to be a poll worker, be a poll manager, and get that really great $7.50 an hour that they get, and show up for training for a while, get there at 5:30 in the morning, stay there till 11 o'clock at night to run these elections. They are all American heroes, and we should be thankful to them each and every damn day. You can. That was my best Jeb Bush. You can applaud now. And I want to try to get as many questions answered about this. Ben, do you have anything specific you want me to answer real quick? Or?
Yes, for starters,
Yeah.
how can you assure voters that only eligible people are able to register and then to cast ballots?
Every state has some kind of system like this, but we all do something called list maintenance. And when somebody registers to vote, and I'll go specifically in Georgia, 98% of registrations come through the Department of Driver Services, what many of y'all would call the DMV. And we are a real ID state, and we are what they call an opt-out state. So when you show up to get your driver's license, has anybody got a driver's license the last few years in a real ID state? It is a pain in the butt. You got to find your birth certificate. You got to find your passport. Or if you are a resident alien legally here, you have to have your alien ID card with your alien ID number. So in Georgia, you come in, you present these documents, and they scan them, and they keep them on the record. So the state has a copy to prove citizenship. Or if they aren't citizens, we have an alien ID number. So if an alien ID number, you're not going to get registered to vote because that's your identifier, unless you get naturalized. And we can use the SAVE database in the Department of Homeland Security to say you are now a citizen, you are now registered to vote. And we do list maintenance all the time, every day. I know a lot of people think elections are this one day in November. Elections workers work literally every day, every hour, every week. And we get death records in all the time. With our automatic voter registration, if you move from one county in Georgia to another county in Georgia, we automatically move you, and all your voter history goes with you. If you leave the state and cancel your voter registration and come back 7 years later, we reactivate that exact same registration. So there's a lot of things, and then we are part of something called the Electronic Registration Information Center, where we exchange data with other states, and we also have a partnership with every DMV in the country that if a person from our state turns in their driver's license, we get contacted and we send them a mailing saying, looks like you've moved. You want to cancel your registration. We've even now opened an online cancellation portal that they can go through and cancel the registration without having to do all this paper and stuff. But this happens every day, all the time. The death records, we get Social Security death records and vital records from the counties. We have the moving records. We have stuff from national change of address, which we can't just cancel people even when we know they're gone. There's a process you have to follow that's defined by the National Voter Registration Act, which is an antiquated, old law. It involves PIN and mail because it was passed in 1993, I think, and the internet wasn't a thing. And now with these 90-day blackout windows, and you have to have a wet signature to do things, it's insane. But we all follow these processes. Now, there are a few states that are not in that, and Wisconsin can talk about that. But everybody has list maintenance, and we have robust list maintenance. In Georgia alone, over the last 3.5 years, we have mailed 2.6 million pieces of mail to people saying, have you moved? Are you still here? Are you not? We've canceled 600,000 registrations. We have 7,056,000 registrations that are active. We have 1,115,000 that are inactive. And even in inactive status, you can walk in, show your ID, and you can vote. You're still allowed to vote, but it's a part of the process of getting to a cancellation because we want to enfranchise as many people as we can. And I want to ask a question. In 2020, what percent of voters do you think were registered in Georgia? Just yell out what you think. 50? All right, what else we got? 40? 42? 73? 98. 98% of eligible voters were registered in Georgia. You have to go out of your way to not get registered in my state. And we do this all the time. And having that automatic voter registration and having this great data is the reason we know and are very confident that there are no non-citizens on the rolls. And if they were probably registered back in 1990 before we had that ability, and most of them have been naturalized, even if they weren't. We know, we share this data with Eric, with other states, and we know that every state works on this. Now, a lot of them hadn't invested the amount of money that we have, and even now we have a brand new tool we've done in our Jarvis system that if you go to your online voter registration, which we have, and you say, I was just moved from another state, cancel me, we now can get their signature from the DMV records and do a mailing to that state with their signature to cancel them in the other state. And we just sent 5,000 of those out the first time this week. We are all working to make it better all the time. And I've gone around the country. If you're not investing in people and processes to make your system better, you're failing your voters.
Let's give Gabe a round of applause. And Gabe, we're going to...
I got 7 minutes.
Okay. I want to also recognize in the audience, you might be sitting next to county officials that have come from the west side of Michigan and also these 6 states. If they could stand up and we give them a round of applause too. We've been really fortunate, and folks here in Metro Detroit and Washtenaw County. I mean, this is without hyperbole, this is historic to have this gathering here for 2 full nights. People have been from all these states taking time away from an incredibly busy workload to be here having these conversations, and we've also been honored that there's been over 24 national media outlets that have joined us here over the course of the day. So you should all give yourself a round of applause too. So should we pepper Gabe with another question, or should we?
$7.50 an hour? Okay. Come to Arizona, get paid better.
Gabe, you
We're conservatives in my state.
You know a thing about threats and harassment, and maybe you could speak about the climate down in Georgia and some of what you might be anticipating and some of what you've seen. It's a question that came, and I don't want to start on a negative note, but we're taking questions as they come. So,
Well, to start my year this year, I was in Idaho giving a talk to the county clerks there, and I get a phone call I was on city council in Sandy Springs, which is a small city just north of Atlanta. I know there's some Sandy Springers in the room. All right, there we go. And I get a call from the chief of police, which is a little odd. So I answer it, and I'm like, hey. He's like, hey. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Idaho. He's like, okay, oh, good. It's like, why? He's like, well, your house has been swatted. So they called in. It was a pretty sophisticated swatting where they basically said that there was a drug deal gone bad and that someone had shot people in the house and they were dead, and then they had gunfire in the background on the call. So I did learn about the fantastic response speed of the Sandy Springs police, that my neighbors were all freaked out because about less than 2 minutes there were 14 police cars at my house. And fortunately my wife was still at work, so I was able to tell her to stay home or stay at work and go to her parents' house, and she's like, screw that, I'm going home. And then I said, you need to sleep at your parents' house. She goes, screw that, these people aren't going to scare me. And we did find out later on that they were part of the group from Serbia and Bosnia that were doing this around the country to people. And that's like kind of a flamboyant example. But there's still a lot of email threats, a lot of social media threats, and sometimes, we just had in many of our states, somebody had sent white powder, it ended up being flour in most places. But we are now so attuned to it. Our worry is they sent flour to the first 7 states to make us not worry about it and handle it with less care, and there could have been anthrax in the next one. So we're always on this heightened level of alert, not just at the state, but at the counties. At the beginning of this year, there was fentanyl-laden letters sent across the country. Fulton County in Georgia was one of them. I know Kings County in Washington State was the first one to get it. And did anybody else get those in your states here? I can't remember. So at our conference of elections officials, we partnered with the Department of Public Health and gave Narcan, the anti-fentanyl drug, to 130 counties and did training on it. That was not on our bingo card. So it's there, it's real, and the problem is even things that aren't real. One of the things in today's conference, somebody got a mail package and they heard something kind of shaking in it and they didn't know what the heck it was. It ended up being sand from Florida that a real estate agent had sent to them to sell them something, but we had to be prepared for that and think about it as one extra thing. And the thing that always worries me about the threat level is we think about the Department of Homeland Security has come and inspected all of our locations and our voting locations and where our election equipment and everything is. And one of them came and talked to our elections director in Paulding County, which is just north of Atlanta, and said, okay, now what you need to do is you need to park your cars along this section by the windows so if there's a bomb goes off, this will help protect you. That's the way a lot of our local elections officials have to approach and think about this now, which is awful and it's terrible. But I always try to remind people, they say, this is the worst time it's ever been. In the early 70s, 1971 to 1972, there was a political bombing a week in this country. A political bombing a week. And it kind of just went away and sort of memory hold it, but we always are resilient and recover from these things. And every elections official I know, yes, we have mental health things we talk about, and it's much more open now than it used to be, which is a good thing. And they're stressed, but they're always stressed. But they're also adrenaline junkies, and they will get through all this. And I feel like we are much more prepared for it in 2024 than we were in the aftermath of 2020. So I think that's a good thing that we're more prepared than we were previously. It's there, and after watching the HBO documentary the other night, I'm much more worried about Arizona than I am about Georgia. So I feel like, but we're all more prepared than we were, and it still sucks we have to deal with it.
That is a good mic drop, Gabe.
Yeah, are we done?
Yeah.
All right, now I have to go.
We're all leaving with Gabe?
I have to take my Coca-Cola Atlanta-based product to get on my Atlanta-based airline Delta and fly back to Sandy Springs, where ICE is located, that owns the New York Stock Exchange. So
You'll watch CNN, right?
and then I'll watch CNN. But thank you all. I'm so sorry I can't be here for the whole thing. I was intending to have fun tonight with this. And again, hopefully if you have questions, write them down, and I can maybe write you back answers. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm trying to duck on this. I want to answer every question you have. And one of the things I learned in my first big press conference, political junkies by nature, by law, have to watch West Wing. It's a thing. And Alan Alda had a talk till you drop press conference in front of a nuclear plant one time. And my first press conference, I said, I'm just going to punch the press out. And I stood there for an hour and a half. And at the end of it, you can watch it on YouTube. I said, did I punch y'all out? Is that it? Do you have anything left? I wanted to do that tonight, and I'm sorry that I can't. But thank you all for coming and being involved in this process. So I gotta go.
Thank you. Safe travels.
Have fun.
Well, thank you. We'd now like to go down the line, and if you could introduce yourselves to the folks, but we have the 5 battleground state election officials. Al, why don't you start? It's on.
I'm Al Schmidt. I'm Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the greatest Commonwealth represented here tonight. And I've lived in several of them over my life. I'm Secretary of State, and we have a responsibility for overseeing elections in Pennsylvania, although they are really run at the county level. Prior to joining the Department of State, I had been an elected city commissioner of Philadelphia. I was a Republican on our 3-member election board there and ran elections in Philadelphia County for 10 years.
Well, good evening. I'm Megan Wolf. I am the administrator of the State of Wisconsin Elections Commission and the State of Wisconsin's chief election official. So a couple of things about Wisconsin. First of all, we run elections at the state level a little differently than other states. We have a bipartisan commission, 3 Republicans and 3 Democratic members. They're appointed by legislative leadership. They actually have to meet in a public meeting anytime they want to give guidance to our local election officials. If they want to implement a new law, they have to meet in a public meeting, and they have to get 4 votes in order to move anything forward, which is pretty incredible because that means it's always going to be bipartisan anytime they make a decision. I'm the administrator and the chief election official. Our Secretary of State does not have anything to do with elections in Wisconsin. My job is just to carry out the directives of my commission. So I don't have a vote on the commission. I carry out their directives. We also run elections at the municipal level rather than at the county level like a lot of other states. There's some other states like Michigan that also run it at the municipal level. But Wisconsin has the most decentralized election system in the country. So where other states may have 50, 100, 200 county election officials, we have 1,850 municipal election officials in addition to 72 counties. So we have 1,922 local election officials in Wisconsin. So it can be challenging, but it also means that we have this really deep connection in each one of our communities where our local election official really knows their voters within each of their communities. So really pleased to be with you all tonight and look forward to answering your questions.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Brader. I'm the director of the Bureau of Elections in the Michigan Department of State under our chief election official, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Thank you all, especially those out of state, for being here, and welcome to Michigan. The Bureau of Elections, our primary role when it comes to elections is working with our 1,521 city and township clerks and also 83 county clerks when it comes to administering our elections. We also have elections run at the local level, but one of the things that's a little distinct from Wisconsin and some other states is that we have election responsibilities that are shared between our municipal clerks, our city and township clerks, and our county clerks. They both play really important roles in the election process. And we're actually joined here tonight by 2 of our great county clerks, Justin Roebuck from Ottawa County and Lisa Posthumus-Lyons from Kent County. So 2 of our, yes. So in some ways, I think we're the most decentralized system because of that division of responsibility, but we'll save that discussion for another day. But thank you all for being here tonight.
Okay, my name is Stephen Richer. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I was previously a business person, then I was an attorney, and then I said, I'm going to run as a Republican for Maricopa County Recorder. Won't be terribly controversial. And I ran on the slogan, which was less politically charged then, make the recorder's office boring again. Well, after 4 years in the role, I have I'm now another politician who has failed on his promises. I am responsible for, among other things, voter registration and early voting in Maricopa County, Arizona. Maricopa County has about 2.5 million registered voters. We make up about 62% of the voting population of Arizona, and we're the second largest voting jurisdiction behind Los Angeles in the United States. But we beat them in the NL semifinals last year, so all is well, but we're trailing them right now in the NL West. So certainly an exciting time and certainly an exciting place, and I appreciate you allowing me to be here to talk about Arizona.
I'm Karen Brinson Bell. I'm the state elections director in North Carolina, or also known as the executive director of the State Board of Elections and the chief election official. Similar to Wisconsin, we are an independent agency. We do not fall under the Secretary of State in North Carolina, so I serve, as I said, as the chief election official. I'm appointed by a 5-member board, and the board is made up of the 2 largest political parties and appointed by the governor. And it reflects the governor, so currently we have the party of the governor. So currently we have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And then we have 100 county boards of elections. That's their sole job, is to conduct elections in our state. And they have 5-member boards. The board members at neither level are full-time. They really have more of a quasi-judicial role, and they delegate most of the administrative authority to me as the state director or to the county directors. And I'm thrilled to have with us tonight Tim Suji, who's from Forsyth County, North Carolina. We can bring some basketball to this conversation because ACC is not really known for football. So Tim's in Forsyth County is where Wake Forest University is. I am a huge NC State Wolfpack fan. I'm wearing Carolina blue. That's about the most allegiance to Carolina that you get out of me, and I don't know what I bring about Duke. But we're very proud of our basketball and our barbecue, but we're also very proud about our elections. And many of you may be scratching your head going, why is she up here? North Carolina is not a battleground state. They're not a swing state. They're not purple. We are. So, and we did not face some of the challenges that my colleagues here faced in 2020, but we were, I've often said, just under the radar. And probably the difference of whether we had faced the same level of threats and scrutiny and so forth came down to about 75,000 ballots. And we get a lot of questions around the fact that our state went red in the presidential contest and elected a Democrat for governor. Our legislature is led by Republicans, but then more of our council of state are Democrat. That's North Carolina. There's a book, The Paradox of Tar Heel Politics. I'm native North Carolinian. There's some other North Carolinians in the room who know what I speak of. And so I've worked in elections for 18 years now. Over 18 years, including being a county elections director. So it's quite an honor to have oversight of our election processes and to work directly with those 100 county election directors and staff and board members.
So I'm not too surprised, but I've received quite a few questions that have to do with mail voting. Other people refer to it as absentee voting. Just show of hands, do each of your states have voting by mail? Okay, well then, the corollary to that, if I can synthesize many of these cards I'm receiving, are, how are these ballots handled? Is there signature matching? And well, let's talk about chain of custody. And there's two words that come up repeatedly I'm seeing on these questions, drop boxes. But maybe we can go down the line, starting with Secretary Schmidt and talking a little about these themes.
What did we ever talk about before mail voting in our states? It's as if elections were not already plenty complicated and controversial to begin with. Pennsylvania, starting in 2019, our Republican House and our Republican Senate and our Democratic governor at the time passed no excuse absentee ballot voting in Pennsylvania or mail ballot voting. Before COVID was really even on anyone's horizon, but it was introduced in primary 2020 in the sort of peak COVID environment just a few years ago. So it was quickly adopted by a lot of our voters. In Philadelphia County, half of our voters voted by mail and half of our voters voted in person at the polling place, about 375,000 each. In Pennsylvania, you have to request and apply for a mail-in ballot. Even though it's no excuse, you still have to apply. You have to provide a social security number or driver's license number to establish your identity and all of that. And if approved, the ballot is sent out to you and has to be returned by 8 p.m. on Election Day. It has greatly improved voter accessibility in Pennsylvania. Before, if you were a firefighter working a 12-hour shift, if you're somebody working in a fire department working a 12-hour shift, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're working 2 jobs, if you've got grandkids to take care of, or anything else like that, you could not vote by absentee ballot prior to 2020 in Pennsylvania.
And how do you verify, if each of you could address, how do you verify those ballots to be sure they're accurate?
Yeah, so in the state of Wisconsin, much like was discussed in Pennsylvania, absentee voting is an incredibly deliberate process, right? Every part of it is very well controlled by those local election officials. So I think, one of the things we hear often is the state is sending out ballots to voters, and that's not true. It's each of the 1,850 municipal clerks, and before they can send out a ballot, first you've got to be registered to vote. And then the municipal clerk is going to get a request from you. They don't automatically send it to you. They're going to send a request, a voter will, if they want a ballot. And then the municipal clerk's going to decide whether or not you are indeed eligible and still eligible and on the poll list. And then they'll issue that ballot. You also have to provide a photo ID with your absentee ballot request. And then once that's sent, we are able to track it in the mail. We even have what's called intelligent mail barcodes so that a voter can track their absentee ballot throughout the mailing process. And then finally, when a voter returns a ballot, that clerk is going to have to check that ballot back in, right? So they're going to have to say, okay, did I get a request from this voter for an absentee ballot? Did I issue them a ballot? And only then, once they've gone through those checks, can they take that ballot in and actually send it to the polls in order to be counted. So it's a very, very deliberate process, and a process that's carried out by each of the municipal clerks in the state of Wisconsin that have these really deep ties with their communities. I should also mention that we don't have early voting or actually putting the ballot through the tabulator before Election Day. So in Wisconsin, your absentee ballot is kept secure in the absentee envelope, and it's sent to your polling place to be counted on Election Day as part of a very public process. And I also should have earlier introduced our two wonderful local election officials from Wisconsin. So we have Lisa Tolfson and Kim Pitlisky, who are here from the state of Wisconsin, and they really are the real heroes of Wisconsin elections, are our local election officials.
So a lot of similarities, so I won't repeat everything, but a couple things I want to highlight is similar to Wisconsin, when the ballots come in, they are checked by our municipal clerks. So 1,521 municipal clerks and their staffs are doing that review. One thing I want to highlight is when that envelope comes in, no matter how it's delivered, whether it's delivered through the mail or in person or in a Dropbox, the ballot is in a sealed envelope. That envelope remains sealed, and on that envelope is a signature. And before anything else happens, the clerk or their staff will review that signature against the voter signature on file and make sure it matches. If it doesn't match or if there's no signature, then that ballot is rejected until they can contact the voter and see if there was a reason it didn't match, like a hand injury, or if it was just missing a signature. But until that's verified, it cannot be processed for tabulation. Then after the clerk is done with it, then it goes to the absent voter ballot processing facility, and that's where poll workers, not the clerk, but poll workers are the ones who are making sure that the clerk did check the signature by looking at the clerk section to verify that, and only then do they open up the envelope, and then someone else who can't see the envelope for the voter's privacy will then take the ballot out so it can be tabulated.
Okay, at the risk of being a little repetitive, I'm going to go through our process as well, because in Arizona, it's important. We've had no excuse vote by mail since 1992, and in my county, Maricopa County, it makes up about 85% of the vote. So, a sacred principle of elections across the states is you can't have a vote without a registered voter. So some of the people have already talked about the steps that go into making sure registered voters are legitimate, that they're real people, that they're not your dog, that they're not Mickey Mouse, that they're checking the last four of the social with the Social Security Administration. They're mailing out a voter registration card to that known address. So not unless there is a registered voter. When we send out a mail ballot packet, it has a return envelope that is assigned to you as an individual voter, meaning that if you drop off a stack of ballots and a stack of cookies outside of our office, we will take the cookies, but we will have to just box up the ballots and not do anything with them. But thank you for the cookies. It has to come back in chocolate chip. Thank you. We make exceptions for cookies. So it has to come back in that green return envelope that is assigned to you. Why is that important? Well, it allows you to track your ballot all through the process, and that's pretty fun, and it allows you to stay on top of the process. But it's also important because we load a vote to your profile as soon as we scan that back in. That means that if you ask for another mail ballot, we would say you've already returned a mail ballot. That means if you show up to vote in person, you've already returned a mail ballot. We'd have to give you a provisional ballot. Now, once we scan that in, then we also verify your signature. So it goes to people who have received 2 days of signature verification training. They have all the signatures in your historical record that we've ever captured from you voting before, and they see if it's consistent. Then it goes to a manager queue who also looks at it. And only once it's done that or been cured, as mentioned in Michigan case, then does it go to a bipartisan team, at which point the ballot is extracted out of that green return envelope. So a lot goes into that process, but this is not just a process where, for instance, if somebody were to time the USPS truck and they pulled it out of your mailbox, just as you were saying them, well, hopefully you would call the police, but hopefully you would also call my office and you would say, somebody just grabbed my ballot out of the mailbox. And we would say, no problem, report it to the police. We'll report it to the police as well, but we will deactivate the barcode on the return envelope such that the thief can't use that, and we'll send out a new one to you, and that will be the only live one. So that barcode, which is true across states, is very important and is how we make sure that one registered voter is only voting once.
So I can offer up a few differences in North Carolina, similar in some ways. We offer 3 voting options to voters in North Carolina. They can vote on Election Day in person. They can vote in person early voting, which is a 17-day period in North Carolina and is the most popular method of voting in our state. And then we do offer absentee by mail. In 2020, that was our second most popular method of voting. And since then, it's moved back to third, but it does show an increase. So we are anticipating a strong use of our selection of absentee by mail. A voter in North Carolina makes a request. We have a set form that they must use in North Carolina. They can do this in writing, or they can do that through the portal that we offer to all voters if they choose to make that request. We are a no excuse state. That term's come up. So we do not ask, why are you unable to be present on Election Day? There are still some states that do have that requirement in place. We are not one of them. And so once they make complete that request form, they're giving information like Social Security so that we can check to verify that they are a registered voter in our system before that is mailed out to the voter. In some cases, we also will have multi-partisan assistance teams to go out to care facilities, because care facility workers are not allowed to assist voters in voting their absentee ballot. So that's an issue that's come up at times. But nonetheless, so the voter receives their ballot. We have a tracking system as well that helps them follow it in the mail stream from when it left the County Board of Elections, and when they return it, it's going to be tracked in the mail stream as well. They have the option in North Carolina, we do not have drop boxes. They have the option to drop it into a mailbox, or they can deliver it to an early voting site or the County Board of Elections. Receipt of the absentee ballot in North Carolina is now 7:30 p.m. when our polls close on Election Day. We used to have a grace period where it could be postmarked for Election Day and then received 3 days later, but that law was changed, and so this will be our first presidential election where it is required to be received by 7:30 p.m. Our verification process is unique. We are one of the few states in the nation that does not do signature verification. We have piloted that in 10 counties, but we have a system of witnesses. So 2 witnesses must sign the return envelope indicating that they saw the voter mark their ballot. Not how they marked their ballot, but they saw that voter being the person who marked the ballot. In lieu of 2 witnesses, they can have a notary. There's also an indication of assistance if that was provided. That has to be completed. The voter themselves sign it, of course. And then there, as of 2023, municipal elections, we now have voter ID in place in North Carolina, and that includes absentee by mail. So on the return of the absentee ballot, they are to provide a copy of their photo ID, or they may complete an exception forms that indicates they were not able to obtain an ID, an acceptable form of ID, or that they were not able to make a photocopy. And so that goes into a little pocket similar to a FedEx envelope. And all that comes back to the County Board of Elections. And then our board members have absentee meetings that start 5 weeks out from Election Day. And that's held once a week at least on the Tuesdays of those 5 weeks. And they are looking to see that before they remove the ballot from the envelope, they're making sure that those witnesses were provided, that the photo ID was complied with, and then we can actually open and put those into the tabulator on behalf of the voter, processing those in advance, but we don't actually count the ballots, turn it to tabulate until Election Day when there's another board meeting. And all of these processes, all these board meetings are public for people to be able to observe what's taking place. I think I covered all that.
Thank you much. Okay, this is a question for Jonathan from fellow Michiganders. Actually, there's two questions, but I think they're interrelated.
Michigan beat USC.
Well, you know, one of them could be interpreted as related to Arizona. The first question is, what about snowbirds? How do I know that they're not voting in, let's say, Arizona and then also in Michigan? And then someone else wants to know, how about those U of M students who might be voting here and then also voting back home?
So I think two versions of the same question with people in different life stages. One of the things that we do in Michigan is we're a member, Gabe mentioned before he left, of the Electronic Registration Information Center, ERIC. And we use that for multiple purposes, including canceling voter registrations when people register to vote in another state. But another thing that we use it for is after each election, we and the other states put data in there for who voted. And we then compare the data that we get, and if somebody does have a voter record in multiple states, we can see that, and then that person is referred for prosecution. I will just say, yeah, sure, they're referred for prosecution. So we'll investigate it. You know, we'll work with the local clerk. We'll work with the local clerk to make sure that it was not an administrative error, because sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes you have a junior and a senior. And the history is recorded for the wrong voter. But once we confirm that, they do get referred for prosecution. And I will just say, editorially here, trying to vote twice is a really dumb idea, because every time you vote, you create a public record that you voted. So whether you're trying to vote twice in one state, where we all have protections against that, or you're trying to vote in multiple states, you're creating a permanent record of what you did, and you are going to get caught.
Even dumber, perhaps, is when people, in the very rare occasion, try to vote for a deceased voter. It's the easiest thing in the world to prove. You know when the vote was cast. You know when the person was deceased. You have a public record of when they were deceased and when they cast their vote. So it's one of the many sort of myths that I think we've all encountered. I know that I have, running elections in Philadelphia, and what people might sometimes think about our city. But it's one of the many things that when you actually know more about it, you can understand why it's so infrequent.
I do want to point out, just because I hope you don't mind, but I heard you say that, but it's happened. And that is true. And that is unfortunately how law enforcement works for a lot of things. So in Arizona, Mom lives at the house with me. Mom dies 3 days before ballots go out. Well, that's not going to push up through the Department of Vital Records in time to remove Mom 3 days later from the voter rolls by the time that ballot goes out. Well, I know what Mom's signature looks like. Mom lived with me, so I can pull her mailbox. I fill out Mom's ballot. I imitate Mom's signature. I send it back. When we get Department of Vital Statistics monthly deceased reports afterwards, we're going to see that this person died 3 days before the election but cast a ballot. That ballot is going to be cast, and it's not going to be backed out. But there is going to be a felony prosecution for that. And, you know, unfortunately, that might not be to your satisfaction, because it's an ex post instead of an ex ante system. But so much of what we do in the law is bad things happen, we prosecute them, and then hopefully there will be some sort of deterrent factor. In Arizona, something like that is a Class 6 felony. So that can get you that's not something you want on your record. And so while there are lots of things that are built into the system, garden variety, one-off fraud like that does happen, and it is caught usually on the back end rather than on the front end.
And just keep in mind, Gabe was touching on all the list maintenance practices that we have going on daily, weekly, monthly, biennium list maintenance. We're getting notices of national change of address and things of that nature so that we can keep our voter rolls up to date. So we are being notified of these moves, of the deaths, of felony convictions and so forth. So by the time we have these instances, the rare instance of a double voter or rare instance of someone, who mom died, they are rare. They are very minuscule, and the effect of them having any determinative outcome on the election is really, it's not there. So, that's what we also have to keep in mind, is we're not talking about something rampant or something that could be outcome determinative.
And related to this is the issue of non-citizen voting, which is the subject of many suits around the country. How do you be sure that there are no non-citizens voting in your states? Al, you want to?
Sure. But before I answer, I just want to acknowledge that Pennsylvania, two of our best election officials are also represented here. Mr. McClure from Northampton County all the way in the east, and Mr. Harrett from Allegheny County in the west. I was a Republican election official in Philadelphia. Spent a lot of time investigating allegations of voter fraud. Every possible permutation, from double voters to voting for deceased people to non-citizens. Conducted years of research on it, found that it occurred very infrequently, and what the records indicated when you went through each individual one of these records, that it had taken place through our motor voter system, where non-citizens, while they go into a board of elections, this is some years ago, 2017, I approached the Department of State about it because non-citizens were getting a driver's license in Pennsylvania, but then they were encountering the screen that said, are you an eligible voter? Are you a citizen of the United States? Are you over the age of 18? And all the rest. But the system knew that they weren't eligible. So in my opinion, and the Department of State came around to that opinion and quickly rectified the issue in 2017, non-citizens, when they get a driver's license in Pennsylvania, no longer encounter that at all. There is no asking if you're a citizen or not. They're not asking if you're over 18. It knows you're over 18. It knows you're not a citizen. So if you're under 18, like my daughter when she just got her driver's license, or you're a non-citizen, you don't encounter those screens at all. If you are a citizen, you still encounter them, because it's part of the affidavit that you're completing to register to vote. So in addition to that, that closed the door for how it was occurring. However infrequently, that was how it was occurring. And then the Department of State took the next step, which I was grateful that they did, which is to do a series of mailings to people who had been registered through that process. Again, however few there were, to swear and affirm that they are citizens or became citizens along the way. Because remember, you could get a driver's license in January and become a United States citizen in February. So people aren't being removed through some flawed data and losing their right to vote despite being U.S. citizens, or signing and acknowledging that they are not registered to vote. Can I add one very quick thing about it, because it's super important? We talk about this as being an election integrity issue, but in my experience, it was also a very human issue. You had anyone who does that, anyone who has been registered to vote, who chooses to apply for U.S. citizenship, who chooses to become a new American, like many of us, not only gets in trouble with the law, but is deported or cannot gain citizenship under grounds of poor moral character. And if you've begun that citizenship process, you would get deported for doing it. So the consequences of it are really severe. I don't know every single one of these people, although I've met a lot of them that this has happened to. But one thing I know for sure is they didn't go into a DMV office with their foreign documentation and then be asked if they wanted to register to vote and thought, I'm going to commit some voter fraud right now. That never happened a single time. It was because of language accessibility reasons, or because they just went to a government office and said, I'm not a citizen, and the government office said, would you like to register to vote?
Can we, I want to recognize there's been quite a few questions. We'll stay what I'll call the foreign lane. A lot of folks are curious about cybersecurity in your offices, and I realize that might be different in county offices as well.
We've done considerable efforts in North Carolina around cybersecurity, coordinating with our federal, state, and local partners to be preventative in attacks. That's through training, that's through network monitoring, that's through logging, that's through things that, that's not my specialty, so I lean on the people who are. That includes the North Carolina National Guard Cybersecurity Unit. That includes the folks at the Department of Homeland Security and CISA. And when I mentioned local, we are fortunate enough to have a group called NICL-GISA, North Carolina Government Information Systems Association. But those are...
Say that 3 times
I know,
fast?
that's why they go by NICL-GISA. But they are the county election officials who are not only serving the elections office, but all of county government. And so we have worked in coordination with them when there are issues. We use some of our Help America Vote Act funds to create what we call ARCs, Attack Response Kits. And these are mobile offices in a box. So when we've had ransomware attacks on county government where they've had to shut down their services, that can happen while we have voting going on, and it did. And so we've been able to keep those counties operated with these ARCs because they have clean laptops, they have MiFi devices to connect them back to our network securely, things of that nature, so that they even have a cell phone in the kits so that we can be in communication with them, because cell phone or phone services may be shut down, but we can keep elections going and working. And also, those local IT folks don't have to worry about the elections office now. We've got it. Go fix the rest of county government that needs help and needs their services. And so working across that partnership in a joint task force for cybersecurity has been really critical to make sure that we are safeguarding our elections against attacks. But we also know that if we are unfortunately subjected to that, that we've got the expertise to ensure that it does not affect the outcome of an election. And, and then furthermore, we thought that AI might be our pandemic of this election year.
You're getting to my next question
Oh.
with someone with great handwriting.
Well,
Your writes in purple heads. So if anyone wants to touch on AI and interrelated themes.
I don't want to take the AI
You want an
question,
arc?
but I want to talk if I may. Is that okay, fearless leader? Okay. On the hacking point, our Secretary of State has done a lot of the hardening things related to cybersecurity. But in Arizona, as in many states, we hand mark paper ballots. We fill in an oval. So if everything was hacked and if we had electronic Armageddon, we would still have a paper ballot that cannot be digitally manipulated, that will always be an immutable, auditable paper trail. And in Arizona, as well as many other states, and I'm sure the elections group people can tell you exactly which states, there are post-election hand count audits done after the election by the political parties to make sure that the tabulation machines were not manipulated in any way. So important security principle, because I quite frankly hate that the expense and the trouble and the killing the force every single election, but the security people love hand marking paper ballots for that very reason.
And most of us are not connected to the internet with our voting equipment or our tabulation software.
Are any of you connected to the internet?
For tabulation equipment, no.
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 So does anyone? Are there any other anecdotes? No. Are there any other anecdotes about cybersecurity or? Yeah, we've gotten quite a few questions about this.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about in Wisconsin with our incredibly decentralized system, how do we handle cybersecurity? So let me kind of paint the picture a little more about how Wisconsin election jurisdictions work. So we have 1,850 city, town, and village clerks. Of those, over 1,200 are in towns. And I think here in Michigan, you have townships as well, so you know these are really small places. Over 2/3 of our municipal clerks are part-time. So that means that they probably work another full-time job, or they might be a retired person, and they're paid by their municipality to be a clerk for 5 hours a week. So during that 5 hours a week, they've got to run elections, they've probably got to do dog licensing, liquor licensing, taxes, whatever needs to be done. Some of them might even drive the snowplow, right? But what they're probably not going to be doing is IT and cybersecurity. You know, that's not something that the majority of our clerks are going to have expertise in. And so in the state of Wisconsin, we've done a lot to try to make sure that our clerks don't have to be cyber experts, that we've built those things into the statewide voter registration database that they utilize. So for example, before we'll even give one of our clerks credentials to use the statewide database, first, they have to take cybersecurity training. It's interactive. They have to complete it before we'll give them a username and password. We've also done things like grants so that our local election offices, we all get money from the federal government, or we have in the past, from the Help America Vote Act through Congress. And in Wisconsin, we've given the majority of that to our local election offices. And it's hard to split up the pie. If you get, you know, $1 million, but you have to split it up in 1,850 different ways, that's not a lot of money. And so we had $1,200 grants, which a lot of people would say, I'm not going to apply for a $1,200 grant. What can I do with that? Well, we had over 1,000 Wisconsin municipalities apply for $1,200 grants because it allowed them to buy a new computer that met cybersecurity standards. It allowed them to attend cybersecurity training, and it allowed them to engage with a cybersecurity managed service provider. We've also done things with grants to give our local jurisdictions the opportunity to move to a .gov email address. And the reason for this is a lot. It's you know, cybersecurity protection for that domain, but it's also for confidence, right? How confident would you feel getting an email from the address ilovehorses@yahoo.com telling you about voting, right?
Email.
Sorry, Stephen. But that's probably not going to make you feel really confident unless you're Stephen. And so moving them to .gov really allows the clerks to give that legitimacy not just to their office, but to their voters, that they're actually communicating with a real government entity. We are also one of the first states, even though we have the most clerks, we have over 3,000 users of our statewide database, we were one of the first to implement multi-factor authentication. And I have a cute story about that. When we first went out and showed all of our clerks our multi-factor token. So you all have probably used multi-factor authentication. You have a physical token. And I showed it to them, and one of the clerks came up to me, and she was really worried about the little end that inserts into the computer. And she said, is it okay if I knit little sleeves for all the clerks so that they can keep their multi-factor token safe? And I thought that was pretty adorable, but it just showed how seriously they took it, right? And so it's been a huge success for us because they really treasure those, and they really take that cybersecurity precaution very, very seriously. So in Wisconsin, it's not so much about making sure all of our clerks are cyber experts. It's about meeting them where they are and making sure that we can support them in making sure they're administering their elections securely.
Jonathan, we've had topics, frankly, I don't really know much about because I don't know much about artificial intelligence. I think the whole world's learning about it, but I know Michigan really was a leader in this country with some legislation that was passed into law last year, but maybe you can speak a little about AI, which is a good chunk of this pile.
Sure. Just to be clear, I am not an expert in artificial intelligence. I don't want to give anyone that impression. But we have taken a lot of steps, and other states have too, to combat some of the emerging threats that are attributable to artificial intelligence. We did, our state legislature did pass a law that required disclosure and created some penalties for using artificial intelligence in certain kind of political communications. But when it comes to the election side, what AI really does is it supercharges some of the threats that we have already been facing for a number of years. So what you're worried about are things like phishing attempts, trying to get into people's email addresses, trying to impersonate other folks. AI helps you do that more effectively. I mean, you can simulate people's voices, you can simulate people's images and make videos that look like them. So one of the things, but one of the things that AI does is potentially make those threats easier to use and potentially more effective. The good news, though, is that a lot of the tools to combat them are really the same as the tools that we use to combat other types of threats. So your basic cyber hygiene, making sure you're not giving away your passwords, making sure you're not clicking on suspicious links, even if it's looking like it's coming from a source that is more legitimate. We just have to make sure that we and all of our local officials are on higher guard against those kinds of attacks. And also in the misinformation space, even before we were having kind of the more modern discussions about AI, we already had bots that were out there that were sharing and amplifying on social media, lots of false claims. So that has just gotten even more extreme. But again, either way, we can't answer all those tweets one by one. Regardless, we don't try to do that. What we try to do is get the accurate information out there and show people where to go to learn what's really going on.
And just, can you speak to the legislation last year and the safeguards that were put in place through that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's requirements now in our law in terms of if you're using AI to generate certain kinds of political communications, that has to be disclosed, and there's penalties associated with that.
Let's talk a little bit more about mail ballots and the way that they are really authenticated and how people can take faith that votes are accurately counted. So talk a little bit about the way ballots come in and the tabulation process to guarantee that they're safe, and throw in post-election audits to give people comfort about it. Megan, you want to start off?
Sure. So to build off of what we talked about before in terms of absentee voting, again, a very intentional process that's run by your local clerk, no matter what state you're in. This is a process that's very, very carefully executed. But how do we make sure that what a voter intended when they marked their ballot is how it's actually tallied is something that we do both before an election and after elections as well. So prior to an election, every single piece of voting equipment in the state of Wisconsin has to be publicly tested to make sure that the tabulation equipment is tabulating the votes correctly. Anybody can go and attend those tests in any of the communities in Wisconsin. I'll let anybody venture a guess how many people show up. It's 0. But we do try to make sure that our clerks are advertising this. We give them all sorts of draft press releases and things to really encourage their communities to come and be a part of this process. Then after the election, our commission, so again, our 6-member commission, they meet in public and they decide how many ballots should be audited after the election. I've been in elections for 13 years. My lucky year. And in that time, we've gone from about 2% of ballots that have been audited to now the commission has 10% of the ballots that are audited after the election. They're going to meet next month to determine what this year's audit's going to look like. But what happens during that audit is that they're going to go through the election officials. We're going to have bipartisan pairs that canvass those ballots, and they go through and they hand count the ballots to ensure that the paper ballots match the totals of the electronic tabulation equipment. And again, that is a publicly observable process, just like everything else in elections. You can go and watch that process as it unfolds. The jurisdictions are also randomly selected after the election. So of course, they don't know who's going to be audited. There's no heads up about, where tampering should or shouldn't happen, right? It's something that's a random selection after the election. And I expect that this year, in addition to jurisdictions that use electronic tabulation equipment, the commission's also going to consider whether or not there should also be audits on our hand count jurisdictions. Because in the state of Wisconsin, about 90% of the ballots cast in Wisconsin are cast using optical scan equipment. So that's where you mark the paper ballot, and it's like the Scantron machine. There's about 5% of ballots that are cast that are on a DRE machine where you mark the ballot on the screen, it prints off, and then you put it into the tabulator. But we have 5% of the ballots in Wisconsin that are hand count municipalities. They don't have tabulation devices because they're so small that the law allows for that. And so this year the commission's going to consider whether or not they should also take a look at and audit those hand count jurisdictions to see how they're doing.
As a former federal auditor, performance auditor, I'm a big believer in audits, but those are audits, of course, conducted using scientific methods by people who know what the heck they're doing. No offense to your ninjas in Arizona some years ago. In Pennsylvania, we use two different methods for auditing those election results to make sure the tabulations are accurate. We have a 2% audit that every county is required to carry out, and Philadelphia County was one of the first to pilot risk limiting audits and the use of them, using a totally different methodology to determine that the tabulated results are the same, and it's now required of all of our counties in Pennsylvania.
This gentleman and I were chatting, and he brought up a good Ronald Reagan quote, which was "Trust but verify." I would say, don't even trust. You know, in Arizona, we never say just because we're good people or we seem nice or anything like that. Although election officials are great people. But because
I love cookies.
yeah, because of a test. And so in Arizona, we're having a robust conversation right now about the merits of machine tabulation versus the merits of hand count tabulation. And though I am by no means accused regularly of being a peacemaker, in this instance, I say, guys, let's do both. Let's take the best of both worlds, because we should never just turn on tabulation machines and assume they work. So some of the pre and post election tests that go in, and hand count audits, and the elections community has gotten, again, I'm pointing to the elections group, has gotten more sophisticated about using more precise audit methodology that goes beyond just saying we're going to audit 2%, 5%, 10%, but doing stuff like risk limiting audits. And so that is one area in which the elections community has said the status quo needs to continue to be improved. And so I'm heartened by that, and it is an important process, because everything in elections needs to be documented and tested so that, yes, you and Mr. Reagan can verify.
So I can answer that. So in Michigan, we do the audits after the canvass. Our canvass period is about 2 weeks. We got to get through the canvass period, and then importantly, we've got to be ready for recounts. So we have to certify the election so the candidates who want to do recounts can do that. And then following that process is when we do audits. But one of the things I just wanted to add about audits, in addition to the value of doing the statistical audits to make sure that the tabulating equipment work properly, which we've also started doing in Michigan, we for many years have done other ballot count audits and procedure audits, where we're also looking to make sure that all of the various election procedures were conducted properly in the precincts that are selected for audits. One of the other things that does is it lets us leverage some of the decentralization in our system, because a lot of the election functions are done by the municipal clerks, but the audits are done primarily by our county clerk's offices. So to shout out again, Clerk Roebuck and Clerk Posthumus Lyons, their offices do a lot of audits, and they've gone above and beyond in terms of doing additional audits and also publishing reports and live streams and things that use those audits not only as a mechanism to make sure that everything was done properly and identify areas for improvement, but also share that information with the public.
And I guess what I can add, Megan touched on the logic and accuracy. Ben was asking is specific to mail, but I think what we're touching on really applies to all ballots. But when we're talking about doing logic and accuracy testing, it's every piece of equipment that's going to be used. So the tabulators that are used to count those mail ballots are going to be tested just as much as something that's deployed to an early voting site or an election day site. In North Carolina, we've had uniform logic and accuracy testing standards, procedures in place across all 100 counties since 2006. Pretty much all the counties were doing something even prior to that, but in 2006 we developed a statewide voting system standards, and in that we said everyone's going to do logic and accuracy to this extent, and that includes testing every piece of voting equipment for their functionality, all the components that are going to be deployed, and it also includes testing every single contest on the ballot, every single candidate position on the ballot, and they're not going to all receive just one. We have unique vote counts so that we can determine that the tabulation is properly being assigned to those candidates or those ballot choices. When we move past logic and accuracy, and even before logic and accuracy. We have a statewide voting system certification program that's been in effect since 2006, and we've even expanded that and the standards that we have to meet. We meet federal standards, we meet state standards, and the voting systems in our state, to be certified, those voting system companies have to put up a bond for the cost of a new election. Right now, that's $17 million, and I sense that after we survey, after this election, we're probably looking at something like 24 million if North Carolina keeps growing the way we're growing. So if there were fault of a voting system to hold a new election, they would have to pony up that money so that we can conduct that new election. Similarly, their source code is put into escrow. There are very high bars of who can go in and review that source code, but that's there too so that we are certain that there's no changes that have been made to the source code or our voting systems. All of this is prior to ever deploying those pieces of equipment. And then post-election, since 2006, North Carolina has had by state law the requirement to conduct a post-election audit. Ours is done in all 100 counties for every election. It can be for the mayor, it can be for the presidency. Every single election is going to have this post-election audit where the day following the election, at the state board, we do a random selection. We actually roll dice. We do it on Facebook Live and streaming and so forth. Then we put it into this sophisticated spreadsheet. That's about as much as I can tell you about it. That was designed by a statistician, and the counties do not know what they will receive. They're going to get 2 voting locations or 2 voting methods that they're going to hand count. So I'll pick on Tim since he's here. Tim does not know right now today, is he going to get 2 early voting sites? Is he going to get a precinct and absentee by mail? That combination is unknown, and he and all 99 other counties are going to conduct that post-election audit before the county canvass, and that is part of what we take to the county board members so that they can ascertain the election and certify, and that is also aggregated so that I can report to the state board how that turned out across the state. We do other post-election audits, including one where we reconcile voter history, the number of individuals who checked in to the number of ballots cast, and that is done before we certify the state election. And and what that's looking for is the circumstance of we may not be perfect on that. A voter may check in and then choose to never cast their ballot. We've had voters to tear up that ballot in front of our face, and therefore it never went into the tabulator. We've had people who went into labor and never got to cast their ballot. So things happen to where you may not have a perfect match, but we work hard to explain that and to give confidence to the public that there was no ballot stuffing, there was no, it added up, and the differences in that did not determine or have a determinative outcome on the election.
Thank you. We have about 10 more minutes, and we have a lot of questions. No, but you know what? There's a theme that's recurring about certification. So if we could quickly, starting with Pennsylvania, give folks a crash course of dates and how counties, and then they pass it off the baton to Harrisburg, so to speak, and we'll just work down the line.
Our counties have 20 days in which they're required to complete their certification process before the results get reported up to Harrisburg. I joked earlier that our timeline in Harrisburg just says forthwith, which must mean in modern English, right away. But our counties are required to complete that process. We had, a couple years ago, 3 counties decline to certify the election results as they're required to do by the Pennsylvania law. So the Department of State, this is before I joined Department of State, it was a couple years ago, but Department of State went to court and got a court order to compel those county commissioners to fulfill their ministerial responsibilities to certify those election results.
So in Wisconsin, like many other states, we actually have 3 levels of certification. So the first level happens at the municipal level. So the municipalities after Election Day are required to meet in public, which you'll notice that's a theme throughout elections. All these meetings happen in public to verify all of the numbers and the artifacts of their election. So when they're doing their municipal canvass, they're looking to see, do we we have more ballots issued than we have signatures or voter numbers in the poll book? If they do, then they've got to go figure that out, right? And again, in public, they have to figure out what went wrong. Why do I have 100 ballots but only 99 signatures in the poll book? And so when they go through that exercise, and once they've been able to explain everything as part of their election, they certify it at the municipal level. Then it goes to the county. The county's going to do the same thing. They're going to go through all of that data, all of the actual paper records. So the municipalities actually, right after the election, have to bring all the ballots, all the poll books, everything to their county office. And their county is going to, again, as part of a public meeting, as part of a bipartisan process, they're going to go through all the numbers of the election to make sure that it makes sense. They can't have more absentee ballots they counted than they have absentee ballot requests. They can't have more voters on their poll book than they have registered voters. And if there are any of these issues identified, they're actually going to have to send it back down to the municipality, who's going to have to reopen their canvas in public to correct the issue. Once all of that's done and all of the 72 counties have certified, it then comes to the state. We have a process where we're able to do all of the same work, where we take a look at their canvas statements and we say, okay, we got 1,000 votes in this small county, but I'm only seeing 980 registered voters. This doesn't make any sense. And so we're going to have to send it then back down to the county, who will reopen the canvas, maybe back down to the municipality. But my point is, all three levels have to agree, essentially, that this is the correct numbers of the election and that we're ready to certify. And then once we've gotten all of the canvas statements from all 72 counties and we haven't identified any errors or omissions that would be determinative of the election, then the chair of our Wisconsin Elections Commission signs the state canvas in a public meeting. So that's a great question. How many days? So in the state of Wisconsin, like many states, the unofficial results you see on election night are just that, unofficial. Certification in a general election takes about 30 days under Wisconsin state law.
Yeah, so definitely talking to our county clerks, hearing 20 days, 30 days, we're a little jealous of that because our county clerks have 2 weeks. So we only have we don't have a municipal canvas that's separate, but the municipal clerks are very involved in the canvas process, getting the records, a lot of the same records that Megan was talking about, and a lot of the same processes are what we have to do. So our county boards of canvassers, we have one for each of the 83 counties. They're bipartisan. They're all 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And then the state canvas is done by our Board of State Canvassers, which is also 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So it's a bipartisan process, and it's comprised of officials who are separate from the clerks and separate from the Secretary of State. So it's another check and balance that we have in the process. One of the things that I think comes through, and I'm not going to repeat it all, is that sometimes when we're talking about canvas and certification and some of the news stories, when you hear about people threatening not to certify, we'll talk about how it's a ministerial task. And it is. That doesn't mean it's not important, and that doesn't mean it's not detailed and difficult. There is a lot that goes into these canvas and certification processes where they are going through and making sure that those unofficial results that came through on election night are actually accurate by looking at the actual tapes that are printed out of tabulators. They can also sometimes correct tabulation errors. We do sometimes have ballots that aren't tabulated correctly on election day. For example, if the tabulator is not working for an hour, sometimes you have voters who are putting ballots in an auxiliary bin to get tabulated later on. Sometimes those don't get tabulated. So you do have issues that do need to be corrected. But that is all part of the process that's first done at the county level, then certified, and then in Michigan at the state level.
At the county level, we have 15 counties, unofficial results, final results. Every county board of supervisors certifies, then it goes to the state at the end of the month to be certified by the governor and the Secretary of State.
In North Carolina, our state law is that we will hold the certification meeting 10 days following the election at 11 a.m. in all 100 counties. And at that point, they will have conducted those post-election audits that I was mentioning. They will also, in that time period, they will be researching provisional ballots. So that's an individual who presented themselves to vote, but were not on that election day poll book, electronic poll book typically. And so we allow them to cast a provisional ballot so that we can research. Did their registration through the Department of Motor Vehicles not get to us and they were truly an eligible voter? Then we are able to, we put that before the county board members for their attention, and they can adopt or approve for that to be counted, and we tabulate those. Or they, there may be a determination that we have this happen, especially in presidential years. They were coming through our state. They were going to vote, by golly. We offered them a provisional ballot, but they were a resident of Virginia. So their ballot's not going to count. So that's the provisional process. We also have the ability to count military and overseas citizen ballots that are received by 9 days after the election. And so that's part of our certification process as well. And the only thing that would change us from certifying a contest is for it to be in a recount or a protest situation. And so what we may find ourselves doing is certifying, all but a certain contest, and we'll have a separate meeting. From the county level, at those 10 days, then it's going to go up to the state board. The state board is scheduled to meet November the 26th to certify our elections.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to you.
That's what we hope.
All right. You all have been super generous with your time, as is the audience. But why don't we do a quick, putting you back in the hot seat, Karen, going down. Just what is the main message as you look at the next 45 days to media in the back of the room and to these diverse Michiganders that you'd like to relay? And Stephen next and onward. So,
I said earlier today, and I think it's the way I would want to summarize, there are profound words in our country about, to form a more perfect union. We are not perfect, but what we do every day, day in, day out, is try to perfect the processes in our profession, and that is what it is. This is a profession for us. We are dedicated public servants whose our job, our compass, our oaths are to ensure that every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot and exercise their right to vote. And that's what we will do.
3 points. The first is, if you have a question, ask. There are a lot of election administrators out there who are very passionate about the topic, so please give them a chance. If you see something on the internet that you think looks funny, that's okay. Just ask. 2, every single state does it differently, but there are a few things that are in common across states. There are bipartisan operations. There are opportunities for transparency. There's opportunities for you to get involved. Things are tested before and after, and things are documented. And then third, I know this is a bit rich of me to say because it's such a beautiful day outside and we're just a stone's throw away from one of the finest academic institutions in the world, but I heard the word snowplow mentioned in the context of Wisconsin. So if any of you ever want to deal with a non-snowplow life, Arizona, we welcome you all, and we have lots of Michiganders.
What are those high temperatures, though?
You don't have to shovel heat. You don't shovel heat.
Okay, I love horses.
Okay. On behalf of Wisconsin, I'm going to disagree with the last thing you said there. But other than that, so but picking up on what Stephen said to some extent, one of the real strengths of our election system, not just in each of our states, but across the country, is it really does reflect what America is in terms of how many separations we have in the way we do our work. We have separations of power, of course. We have 50 different ways of running our elections, which, although we have a lot of commonalities, does sometimes lead to confusion when people don't understand how things are being done. But that really is a strength, especially when we get into the decentralization at the state level. It works somewhat differently in different states, but no matter where you are, the day-to-day work on election day is going to be done by people who are from your communities or from their local communities. And it's really important to understand that when we're having an election, it's not one person running the election in a state. It's not a few people running the election in a state. It's thousands of people. And most of them are ordinary citizens who are giving a little bit of their time to make those elections work. So just when we talk about who's running elections, it's really a lot of us or all of us who are participating in that process. And we need to understand that as we're getting all the way through and after Election Day.
Yeah, so my usual message is, get involved. If you have questions about elections, get involved. But you're all here. And so that means that you are involved, you want to know how elections work, and that's amazing. That's incredible. Thank you all for being a part of the solution to make sure that folks know about how elections work. But if you know people in your lives that have questions, skepticism about elections, that's healthy. That's a normal part of the process to have questions. And the great news is that, like Wisconsin, Michigan has so many opportunities in local election officials that you can ask those questions to. And so ask a local election official your question, get involved in the process, become a poll worker, become a poll observer. There really aren't any dark corners or locked doors in elections. There are so many opportunities to get involved. And so just encouraging folks that have those questions and those concerns to get involved, just like you are here tonight. So thank you all.
Elections have changed a lot in the last several years, not just in Pennsylvania, but in other states in our republic. And it's no surprise that people have so many questions. But those changes have made elections as safe and secure as they've ever been. With a voter verifiable paper ballot record of every vote that's cast in every election in Pennsylvania, starting just a few years ago when it was required that every county switch to that system, and a new system of voting with mail-in ballot voting, which many of our voters have embraced, with a voter verifiable paper ballot record of every vote that's cast that's used in these two audits as well. So on election night, when you hear about delays in Pennsylvania, there are not delays in Pennsylvania. It takes time to count millions of votes with integrity. And our law, unlike many others, does not allow those counties to begin processing any mail ballots until 7 a.m. on election morning. The very first step in the processing can't begin until 7 a.m. on election morning. So it does take time, unlike some other states that have more time to do it. So in Pennsylvania, that's, I think, frequently why we're a star on election night. Don't want to be, but because our election code hasn't been changed in a way that accommodates knowing the results earlier.
Thank you all for your time. This has been a fascinating discussion. I hope we've given you an idea of all the safeguards in this very complex system. And I truly admire the transparency that you and your fellow election officials are showing in trying to explain the system and its safeguards in this particular time when elections are so challenged. So thank you all very much, and thank all of you for coming.